Chapter 11 Confederates of the Ditch. One autumn day, Muhammad paid a call on his son Zaid, and a gust of wind blew aside the hareskin curtain that served as a front door. Muhammad had a sudden brilliant glimpse of Zaid's wife, Zainab, dressed in nothing but a petticoat. Her beauty stunned him motionless. He kept exclaiming, "Praise be to Allah, who turns hearts around." Zainab told Zaid, and Zaid knew his duty. Within weeks he divorced his wife. The law required Zainab to wait 3 months before she could marry anyone else. In that period, Gabriel told Muhammad that adopted sons did not count as real sons, so Zaid was not his son, and Zainab was not his daughter-in-law. Next, Gabriel announced that the limit of 4 wives did not apply to prophets. Unlike other Muslims, a prophet could have as many wives as he liked. When Aisha heard about this, she said, "Allah is very quick to grant your desires." On the day that the 3 months ended, Gabriel informed Muhammad that Allah had married him to Zainab. Just one day after their wedding, Muhammad heard that all his enemies had united against him. A confederated army of 10,000 men was only 6 days' march from Medina. A Persian advised that building a ditch around the city was likely to hold off the invaders. The Muslims went out to the city edge where Muhammad drew the line for the ditch and divided the men into digging parties. Men of every rank and family dug, while children carried away baskets of earth. They kept working until the ditch lay all around the city to the height of a man. Muhammad sent the women and children to shelter in the fortresses. His army, numbering 3,000 men, camped just behind the ditch. Abu Sufyan was the high commander of the Confederate army. Fighting alongside the Quraysh were the Sulaim, the Ghatafan, the Asad, various other allies, and Huyay, the exiled Jewish chief who wanted to bring the Nadr home to Medina. All these tribes had sworn to stand together to fight Muhammad until Islam was destroyed. The ditch was a great success. It was wider than any horse could leap, and the Confederates could not cross it. Their original plan of charging into the city and killing everyone near Muhammad was never going to work. For many days the two armies faced each other on opposite sides of the ditch without acting. There was no real fighting. The Muslims kept patrolling the ditch to make sure nobody managed to cross it. The Confederated army also kept patrolling it, looking for a spot that might be narrow enough to plunge across. There was still one way to enter Medina. The Muslims had not bothered digging the ditch in front of any part of the city that was protected by fortress walls. Anyone could easily enter through a fortress door if someone inside were willing to open it. One fortress was the home of the Qurayza, the last Jewish tribe in Medina. They had not joined the Muslim army, for the Confederates were their friends, and they had only promised Muhammad to be neutral. Huyay knocked on the door of the Qurayza fortress to beg his old friends to support the Confederates. Ka'b, the Qurayza chief, protested that he had a contract with Muhammad, and that Muhammad would be merciless if he broke his word. Huyay wheedled and persuaded, insisting that the Confederates were too powerful to lose the battle, and that all Ka'b needed to do was open a door. Ka'b sent the Muslims a bold message. "We have no contract with Muhammad. I have cut it the way I cut my sandal straps." At these rash words, Muhammad expected the Qurayza to let the Confederated army into Medina to attack the women and children by night. He sent his war horses into the city to fight them. Nothing happened. In fact, it would have made more sense for an army as large as the Confederates to ignore the women and attack the Muslim army directly. This never happened either. Abu Bakr patrolled Medina looking for Jews. He never found any. When the Confederates lined up to search for a gap in the ditch, the Muslims were convinced that they were waiting for the Qurayza so that they could all raid Medina together. Despite Ka'b's confronting words, no Qurayza ever arrived. For just one day, the two armies fired at each other in something like a battle. Sa'ad, the wolf chief, was injured in his arm. Muhammad eventually broke several weeks of deadlock by trickery. Nu'aym, a Ghatafanite, was a long-standing friend of the Qurayza. He was now ready to betray his loyalty to both tribes because he had secretly converted to Islam. "Go ahead," Muhammad told him. "War is deceit." Nu'aym lied to everyone. He persuaded the Qurayza that they could not trust the Confederates and should ask for hostages before they agreed to help them. Then he persuaded the Confederates that they could not trust the Qurayza and that any hostages whom they handed over were likely to be killed. So when the Qurayza asked for hostages, the Confederates refused to give them any. The Confederates and the Qurayza were hurt and bewildered by the apparent indecisiveness of their supposed allies, yet it never occurred to any of them to distrust Nu'aym. It was impossible to negotiate a grand united effort against Muhammad in this atmosphere. That night the east wind was so fierce that fires were extinguished, cooking pots were toppled, tents were uprooted, ropes and pegs were swept away, and saddles were buried in the sand. Abu Sufyan stood up and said, "O Quraysh, we can't camp here forever. The Qurayza have broken their promise and are not going to give us any help. Meanwhile, this wind has taken even our tents and cooking pots. I'm leaving." The Muslims awoke to find that the entire army had deserted Medina. The war was over. The only man who stayed was Huyay, chief of the Nadr, who had promised never to abandon the Qurayza. He entered the fortress to share their fate. Muhammad sent his warriors home and took a bath at Aisha's house. Yet in a matter of minutes he jumped up saying that Gabriel had visited. The war was not over. They must attack the Qurayza tribe immediately. Muhammad approached the Qurayza fortress, calling, "You monkeys, pigs, and evil lovers! Allah has disgraced and punished you, hasn't he? Be very afraid of me." His archers shot at the fortress like a cloud of locusts. They kept up the shooting for 2 weeks. The Jews shot back, but they never came out for a pitched battle. When they ran out of arrows, both sides threw stones. Eventually the Qurayza recognized that their food supplies would not last forever. The Muslims could starve them out. Muhammad had no interest in compromise. After the way he had treated the Jews, it was no longer possible for them to coexist in Medina. One side was bound to destroy the other. When the Qurayza finally surrendered to Muhammad, their allies in the wolf tribe pleaded for their lives. "Will you be satisfied," he asked, "if I appoint Sa'd the wolf chief to pass judgment?" There was no real choice. It was Sa'd or Muhammad. Sa'd was an old ally of the Qurayza, and the wolves kept reminding him of his duty to them as they led him to the assembly. But Sa'd knew that he had to live with Muhammad, so he said he would judge, to please Allah, not men. "I order," said Sa'd, "that every adult male shall be killed, every woman and child shall be enslaved, and all their property shall be divided among the Muslims." Muhammad approved. "You have judged like Allah." The Jews spent that night studying the Torah. Muhammad commanded his men to dig trenches in the Qaynuqa bazaar. The next day Muhammad sat in the bazaar with Aisha, Abu Bakr, Umar, and the rest. He called for the men of the Qurayza tribe to be brought out in small groups, their hands tied to their necks. When they were presented before him, his inspectors pulled down the trousers of the beardless young men, and any who had not grown pubic hair were sent back to the women. The rest were set down at the trenches, where Ali and his cousin Zubayr cut off their heads. Ka'ab the Qurayza chief told Muhammad, "I am still a Jew." Huyay, the Nadr chief, warned, "I am not sorry that I opposed you. Whoever abandons God will be abandoned." At twilight, Ali and Zubayr lit torches. They continued to cut off heads long after dark. They killed at least 600 men. Finally, the tribe was exterminated. The trenches were filled in with earth and the bodies were covered. The Qurayza women and children, after screaming, gown ripping, face slapping, and hair tearing over the death of their men, were parceled to Muhammad or auctioned to the Muslims. Most of them were sold on the slave markets in exchange for horses and weapons. The Qurayza land and property were also distributed among Muslims, the first 1/5 being for Muhammad. Saad, the wolf chief, died a few days later when his battle wound turned septic. Gabriel told Muhammad, "The doors of heaven opened for Saad, and Allah's throne shook." Since Saad Wolf was dead and Abdullah Lion had lost his following, Muhammad was now supreme in Medina. Although a few individuals had not converted to Islam, there were no more large non-Muslim groups. Furthermore, he knew that no foreign tribe would dare attack Medina again. He celebrated his victory by hosting a lavish wedding party for Zainab. 70 guests feasted on roast lamb and date pudding. 3 of them sat around talking long after everyone else had gone home. Muhammad had to retire, return, and retire again before they took the hint to leave. As soon as the men had gone, Muhammad drew a curtain and delivered Gabriel's newest message from behind it. "When you are invited, enter, and when you have taken the food, then disperse, not seeking to listen, to talk." The more important part of the message followed. "And when you ask of women any goods, ask of them from behind a curtain. This is purer for your hearts and their hearts." A wife of Muhammad must keep a curtain between herself and any man who is not a family member. He could discuss necessary business with her, but he must not chat about trivia. Outside her house, she must wear a veil that hid her face up to the eyes. Muslim women who were not married to Muhammad were allowed to expose their hands and faces, but they had to cover their heads, for Allah did not accept the prayers of an unveiled woman. As for slave women, they did not veil at all. Once all free women were veiled, other men would never be able to look at Muhammad's wives in the way that he looked at Zainab.